My name is Ann Sermons Gillis, and I am Vice President of the Theosophical Order of Service. And we have what we're calling a legacy project. And we are interviewing Theosophists from all over the country so that in the coming years, people can look back and say, oh my, look at who they were then and who they are now, or if they even exist now. So today, I'm very excited to welcome Richard Smoley. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yay. Well, we're going to start at the very beginning of your life and ask, where were you born?
I was born in Waterbury, Connecticut in 1956.
Okay, you were born in Connecticut, and where are you living now?
I live in Winfield, Illinois, which is about 3 miles due west of the Alcott headquarters in Wheaton.
Okay, and you live in the cold. I live in the South, which is the deep South, and you live in the cold. It's very cold up there, I know. So you were raised in Connecticut. Did you have, were you raised in any kind of a religion?
Well, I did go to Catholic school and I was raised as a Catholic. My mother's family were Catholic. My father wasn't. My father was a Freemason and was highly skeptical and critical of the church. And I became highly skeptical and critical of the church around the age of 11 and kind of detached myself from it and never went back.
Do you think that you got more value or more harm from your spiritual education as a young person?
Mm, I don't know. Probably 52% more harm.
Okay. And so you left the church when you were how old?
11,
And
actually.
so did you start searching at that point, or was it just kind of, okay, this doesn't exist, forget it, and go on about your life?
I actually was very interested for a year or so in Jehovah's Witnesses and read an enormous amount of their literature. But in the end, I decided that really wasn't for me. My father had a lot of books on mysticism and occultism, and I read those with some interest. But I would say around the eighth grade, I just sort of just set the whole thing aside for pretty much the whole of my adolescence.
And so when did you pick that back up?
I started to become interested again, probably in the last couple of years. I was in college. I started, there was an occult bookstore uh, near my campus, and I found myself going there and reading more and more. So, say around the age of 20.
So were there any particular teachers that maybe living teachers that inspired you?
Um, well, as an undergraduate, I went to Harvard. So this was so that bookstore was in Harvard Square. I did go to England to study at Oxford for a couple of years afterward, and there I got involved with a very small group studying the Kabbalah in a fairly non-sectarian way, and started by a couple of Kabbalists who lived in London, and I came to know them both quite well, and they were certainly influences on my life.
Wow, well, you were at Harvard and Oxford, so that's pretty much, we have a lot of the seat of intellectualism there, that you were learning a lot of different facts and a lot of different erudite things at those places. I'm impressed. I didn't know that about you. Of course, probably nobody does because you don't wear that on your shirt, where you went to school, not on your, well, maybe on your sweatshirt.
I don't have a Harvard sweatshirt. I may get a couple of Oxford t-shirts for my sons for Christmas, but I haven't gotten around to this yet.
Okay, well, how did you find Theosophy?
Well, I did various other kind of forms of spiritual searching when I came to the United States, back to the United States in 1980. And in 1986, I started to write for a very new magazine of the Western inner traditions called Gnosis. And I wrote for it, and I was taken on as editor in 1990. and stayed on with that until 1999. The magazine at that point closed. It was no longer just financially sustainable for lots of reasons, as small magazines um, rarely are. So, of course, in the context of Gnosis, I became exposed to a lot of different teachings, influences, individuals, and of course, I was aware of the Theosophical Society as well. We did cover Theosophy as part of many other things in Gnosis. We certainly did run stories. And then one article we did run was by K. Paul Johnson, in which he identified the masters with certain historical figures. And he later published this in a book called Masters Revealed. And I didn't really know what pretty much to make of it at the time. And we published that article, I think, and it was in 93. Later on, it came to seem likely to me that, the masters were not figures who could be identified with any well-known public figures, as I imagine most theosophists would agree. So I became aware of Theosophy then. Uh, I was aware of it later on. For a couple of years, I was managing editor of the Anthroposophic Press, which was dedicated to publishing Rudolf Steiner's works. And Steiner was very closely connected with Theosophy up to a certain point in his career, namely until 1912. So, and we certainly published writings about that. Steiner always actually spoke very highly of Madame Blavatsky. And after that, in 2005, I was invited by Betty and David Bland to become acquisitions editor for Quest Books, which was the TPH imprint. So I did that, and since staff members have the option of having a free membership in the Theosophical Society, that's when I actually joined. I worked
When was that?
2005.
2005. Okay.
For about 3 years, I did this working long distance. I was living in Western Massachusetts at the time, but there was a point at which the Blands invited me to move to the Wheaton area and also work as editor of Quest magazine. So this was 2008, and I've been editor of Quest, in the 16 years since.
Right. Well, I know that you're editor of Quest, and I want to find out a little bit more about that. But I'd like to also ask, I know you do interviews. What other things do you do with the Theosophical Society? I know that editing the magazine takes a lot, but I think you do wear a lot of other hats. What else do you do?
Well, I do lectures, online lectures, in-person lectures. I do a regular series of lessons for the National Lodge, um, various series of courses. I've written these. These are monthly lessons sent out to people in the National Lodge who want them. Subjects in the past have included, these have been year-long topics with 12 lessons each, Kabbalah, the Tarot, death and the afterlife, esoteric Christianity, philosophy, psychology, and the one I'm currently working on is the esoteric dimensions of history.
And I know you've written a number of books. How many books have you written?
14.
14. Are you in the middle of writing one now?
Well, I actually just finished writing a novel. I wrote a novel over the summer.
Oh,
And well, a couple of agents are looking at it, so who knows if it's ever going to see.
is it is it based in metaphysics, or is it just a novel in general? I mean, just
It has
fiction.
a lot of strong metaphysical themes in it, I will say. Um, uh, I mean, summary description is it's actually about a Harvard professor who starts having visions of a mysterious lady. And this is an idea that actually came to me when I was an undergraduate, because I was thinking, why is it that the Virgin is always appearing to like, Mexican peasants and Portuguese shepherd children? What if the Virgin actually appeared to a Harvard professor? I wrote a story about it as a joke as an undergraduate. I didn't really think much of it as I don't even think I still have that story. But the idea stuck in my mind, and you know, the idea has metamorphosed somewhat since then. So that's kind of the basic premise. So it obviously does have some real esoteric aspects to it.
Thank you. And you are the editor of the Quest magazine, and I know that you've interviewed many, many people for the Quest Journal, rather the Quest Journal. And who are some of your favorite? What were some of your favorite interviews?
Um, well, one that struck me particularly was an interview with Robert Temple, who's written a number of books about, his most famous book is about, what is it called? Serious Mystery, Sirius, in which he discusses the fact that this West African tribe called the Dogon, in their oral teachings, which they got from who knows where, actually has some rather sophisticated knowledge, astronomical knowledge that was not known until 20th century astronomy. And it's just something, things that you just are not going to see with the naked eye. But much of what his most recent book is about plasma, and plasma is kind of the fourth state of matter, along with gas, liquid, and solid. It's kind of this ionized stuff that is much more pervasive in the universe, constitutes a great deal, much larger part of the universe than is generally known. And he has some rather interesting implications of this. And I am trying to remember the name of the book. It'll come back to me in a minute or so. It's in my office at Quest at the TS, so I don't have it with me. So that was certainly interesting. Um, I thought
I will just say about that's probably the favorite interview of mine too. I was so enamored with that. I listened to the video. I took notes. I told everybody I was so excited about that interview and what he had to say. It just blew my mind.
yeah, it's amazing stuff. I mean, you just can't read that book and think the same way about the universe that you did before. At least that was my impression, both from reading the book and interviewing him. So that was certainly very memorable. Um, at times, of course, you tend to remember the most recent ones. I did find the interview with Matthew Fox interesting. Matthew Fox is a former Dominican monk who I think is now an Episcopal priest who has been kind of very active in not only his criticisms of the Catholic Church, but in trying to promote what he calls creation spirituality, which is a much more, shall we say, positive and earth-based approach to religion and to Christianity. So I thought that was interesting. Let's see, who am I? Well, for the we did an issue on Freemasonry, which is the current issue. That is to say, this is the fall of 2024, which is on Freemasonry. And I interviewed my former colleague and boss, Jay Kinney, who is the founder of Gnosis magazine, whom I worked with closely. We were the editorial staff, the two of us. And after Gnosis closed in '99, we went our separate ways. He became extremely interested and knowledgeable about Freemasonry. He wrote a book called The Masonic Myth, which is probably the best single introduction to Freemasonry that I know of. So I took the opportunity of talking to him about his experiences with Masonry, his thoughts about it, his personal reactions to it, and of course, you know, debunking many of the almost countless myths and lies about Freemasonry. So those were certainly some of them. Who else do I have? I'm going to look at my recent issues because, once I do an issue, it just kind of goes into the
I,
back storage. So,
I
you know, I,
understand. Well,
but
let me just ask you about in the back of the Quest Journal, there are book reviews,
mhm.
which are really great. I mean, there have been a lot of them. Just reading the book review is exciting, and I'm wondering, how do you choose the books for the book review?
um, pretty individually. Something crosses my mind and says, this person would be good. This is a particularly interesting topic. I mean, to give you a very, very recent example, a new translation of the Tao Te Ching has been published. The Chinese text on the left and the English text on the right. And so I contacted a friend of mine who's actually written a translation of the I Ching, the original I Ching, as it was in 1000 BC, without the Confucian editions and the Jungian editions all later. And I asked him if he would review it, and he said he would. So I'm looking forward to that. I mean, he hasn't even gotten a copy yet. So ideas like that come to mind.
So you
Uh,
usually go to the people, you have the ideas and you go to the people and you ask for the books. You don't have the people coming to you and asking for to do the reviews.
Both ways. I mean,
Both
I
ways.
just
Okay.
one of our regular reviewers, Dhananjay Joshi, sent me an email just this morning suggesting that he'd like to review a couple of books for us, and I don't know what they are, but the titles look good, and I'm sure they'd work well for us. So, as with the magazine in general. There's an interchange. I mean, I sometimes I do solicit articles for the main magazine. Sometimes somebody contacts me. Sometimes often people just send it in, send something in, and if it's good, you publish it.
Well, I especially love the metaphysical novels that, which there are not all that many of them, but they're a lot of fun. The
Well, I'll let you know its fate. I mean, I basically I kind of wanted it to be, and hope I could pitch it as kind of the Da Vinci Code for intelligent people because the Da Vinci Code hit a nerve, obviously.
yeah.
It hit on a certain truth, but kind of truths it hit on a sense were a bit beside the point, shall we say. Although, yeah, he wrote an extremely successful thriller on it. My book is not a thriller.
That's good. Thrillers, a little bit too much intensity. So we're going to switch just a little bit and talk about service. Since we are working here with the Theosophical Order of Service, what do you think of when you think of service?
Well, I think there's a line in the Bhagavad Gita that says, it's better to do your own, loosely translated, it's better to do your own job properly than to do somebody else's job well. And, I think I, have a sense that each of us does have, some kind of particular talent or purpose that hopefully benefits the world. This is going to be extraordinarily different from different people. There are a lot of areas of service or I'm not particularly interested in. I'm not going to work at Mother Teresa's ashram or whatever it is in Calcutta. Um, and I know a lot of the TOS projects are very worthy. They don't interest me particularly. Um, I certainly see my service as trying to discuss spirituality and spiritual teachings intelligently, thoughtfully, clearly, without either excessive credulity or skepticism. And a lot of people have found that very helpful and very useful. So, um, service can be any number of things, but obviously, this is the place where I can be of most use. And I believe I've done some good.
I think that that is brilliant. And I discovered that particular thing many years ago myself, and that is if you really don't like the idea of feeding starving children in the in Africa, you will not be assigned that. You will not be attracted to that. It's that we are given our gifts, and sharing those talents is a service. And so well said. And thank you. I certainly believe that. Absolutely. Is there a particular aspect of Theosophy that has influenced your personal life?
Well, I mean, my background and interests are in the esoteric traditions in general, like mostly the Western esoteric traditions, although I'm strongly drawn to certain versions of Hindu metaphysics and epistemology. So, I basically resonate with the idea of this core ancient wisdom, ageless wisdom that's expressed in many, many different, shall we say, conceptual languages, including theosophy. Um, I was kind of nebulously familiar with theosophical teaching, when I started working here. I've obviously gotten a lot more so. And I've obviously got much more used to expressing myself in the language of theosophy, the verbiage, the terminology of theosophy, than in, say, esoteric Christianity or the Kabbalah or any other of my interest areas. And that's, really just a function of where I am. I mean, if I moved to France, and I lived in France for 16 years, I would be speaking French, and I'd be even much more likely, probably, to conceive of my thoughts in French than I would be now. So, I regard theosophy as a very legitimate language in which to express the teachings of the esoteric tradition. Um, and I've obviously gotten more and more uh, expert in it. Like, I was having a discussion, like an email discussion with Huli Sasano, who's our national secretary. I wrote something in the latest history lesson about touching on the causal body as portrayed in theosophy. And she and I had an exchange about this, about what exactly the causal body was and is. And that's, I found that a very useful discussion. So, I have you know, uh, I'm at least, able to use the concept of the causal body in my own thought. That would be just one example.
So how would you describe the causal body?
Well, as I understand it, it's called that because it is the cause of your subsequent incarnations. And it is kind of it is a quasi-permanent vehicle for the monad. And it includes these rather mysterious entities known as the permanent atoms, which the astral, mental, physical level, which, shall we say, uh, dictate your karmic manifestations. And I'll tell you why I was talking about it, because the lesson I was writing was on karma in history. And, I think most theosophists would agree that individual karma does play out in one's life. But how does this relate to more collective issues, collective karma? Because nations seem to have karma of their own. And I'm not saying, I'm not posing this as a question to which I have any clear answers. Like with a lot of, particularly with this history course, I've been focusing a lot more on issues that I think are very serious, for which I, and as far as I can see, nobody else, is really going to be able to provide any kind of solid, matter-of-fact answers.
I guess in metaphysics, there are no absolutes.
Well, that's A, that's true, and it's A, that's true, and B, it's remarkably commonly forgotten.
So
And
we're going to kind of move to another topic, and that is, are you a member of a lodge, or have you ever been a member of one of the Theosophical lodges?
Mhm. Yeah, I joined the Springfield Lodge because as I said, I was living in Massachusetts when I started working for Quest and Quest Books in 2005, and I'm still a member. I still get their mailings. I live like 1,000 miles away, so I guess I don't go to any of their meetings anymore. But I am still, and I did go to meetings. When I lived in the area, I know a good number of people connected with it. So yeah, I am a member of the Springfield Mass Lodge.
Does it ever come up in conversations with friends? Or maybe you don't have a lot of us, most of our friends think the same way that we do. But do people ever ask you, what are you about? What is Theosophy? Does anybody ever ask you that? And if they do, how do you respond?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, all my good friends have known that I've been interested in this stuff for a long time. And they basically fall into two categories. One is people who are good friends of mine who are very much into this stuff, like John Chanciosi, a programming director at the TS, is a good friend. He was a Buddhist monk for like 24 years. He's interested in this. We discuss these things regularly. Another, actually, a former Quest editor, Ray Grassi, is another good friend of mine. He's one of the best and most respected astrologers in the country. And, we get together and we talk about, well, he knows the Theosophical Society. He was working here like 30 years ago, so he knows the place, in some ways better than I do. So, and of course, we talk about that. I do have a lot of other friends who, kind of more secularly minded. They know, I'm certainly interested in the stuff and published about it. I think most of them regard it as kind of an amusing eccentricity of mine, and I certainly don't try to sell anything to them, and that's fine. They have interest I don't have. I have no appetite for playing missionary.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that you wrote a book. I mean, change again. I think that you wrote a book, or I'm not sure if it was a book, but it was, and I'm not sure I have the exact title, but I think it was something about maybe Shiva's Game of Life, or
Mhm. Yeah,
did you write a book? Was there a book, or was that
yeah. And as I said, I have been very drawn to certain particular schools of Hindu metaphysics, epistemology, and the book is called The Dice Game of Shiva: How
okay? There you go.
Consciousness Creates the Universe. And um, there's a myth in which Shiva, the Lord of the universe, keeps playing dice with his consort Parvati, which is basically kind of a game of kind of strip parcheesi. Every time you lose, you have to give something up, and Shiva always loses. He loses everything. But the idea is, well, he can lose everything. He's still Lord of the universe. He can lose everything and still have that. Um, Without going into more detail about this, it I will say that this is a depiction of the Sankhya philosophy of India, which is the oldest of the philosophical schools, both of India and many place else, as far as anybody knows it. And this dice game reflects kind of the relationships between Parush, which is, I'm translating as consciousness, pure sense, and Prakriti, which is the contents of consciousness, or what we like to call the world, taken in the broadest possible sense. So, without going into any more detail than that, that's what that's about.
Well, it's certainly a captivating title. The title, even though I didn't get quite right. I remember the title of that book. Uh, are there any, I know you were involved in the Theosophical Publishing House, so were there any favorite books that came through while you were working in that capacity? And if so, what were they? Can you think of any?
I think the one I liked the most, I think, was published in '07. It was by a parapsychologist named Lawrence LeSean, who recently died, I think, past the age of 100. And his book was very, very clear in stating, you know, parapsychologists, people who do psi research, don't need to apologize for themselves anymore because actually hard scientific evidence, repeatable, uh, scientifically rigorous experimentations over the last 80 years, if not longer, have proved that humans do have these capacities for psychokinesis, telepathy, clairvoyance, and so on. Although, of course, in most of us, it's very, shall we say, attenuated. And he said, well, we really need to stop apologizing for this and say, this is actually proven, and we should, acknowledge that and kind of go forward with it. What other books did we publish? I was wondering, someone actually sent me a proposal for something, a subject that I had been interested in but hadn't any uh, direct knowledge of, which was you know, Afghanistan has been in a state of war for over 40 years. Okay. What about all these Sufi schools in Afghanistan? Did they survive? What happened to them? So, and someone actually sent me a proposal on this, and I liked it, and we published it. It's called Embattled Saints, and oh well, it's kind of rough for for those guys out there. Um, Another book that I thought was of interest is a book called The Divine Seed by Pekka Urvas. And Pekka Urvas was a Finnish theosophist of the early 20th century. And he had some very interesting ideas about esoteric Christianity, Theosophy, and Rosicrucianism. A friend of mine in Finland was kind of my contact for all of this, Antti Savanainen, has uh, done a number of translations of Urvas' books. They're not published by Quest, but they are uh, freely available for download on on the internet. And I think that's kind of I thought that was valuable because I think I mean the fact that Finland became so prominent is maybe a certain accident, but it does seem to me the case that most theosophists are kind of only dimly aware of the work and ideas of other sections, which often seem to me to be kind of in tone and uh, emphasis often seem to be quite different from the TSA. So I think just as a general rule, um, I think it's a good idea to promote this kind of shall we say intersectional knowledge.
Wonderful. Well, it's been wonderful interviewing you. I wonder if you have any last words that you would like to end with. Maybe just simply, what is your philosophy of life?
Well, I think it's summed up in knowledge, that knowledge in kind of the deepest sense. And obviously knowledge in its own right is kind of arid, so it has to take some kind of form, not only in personal conceptualization, but in some kind of lived application in the world. So I guess I would say that as a somewhat summary statement of my fundamental stance. So yeah,
That may be information, transformation, and action.
yeah, yeah.
The information would transform us. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Richard.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for your kind interest. Sounds like a fascinating project, and I hope everything goes well with it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll be in touch soon, I'm sure.
Yes, yes.
you.